Um, Putin's going to regret launching the war that he's already launching. Now, has Vladimir Putin's assault on Ukraine outrun the resources he's committed to it? Well, that's a view that's going to be coming from retired U.S. Army Major General Mike Repass. Basically, Repass has an informed vantage point on this conflict since he's worked in the Ukrainian security sector since 2016. The former commander of the U.S. Special Operations Command in Europe, Repass provides education and advisory support to the Ukrainian military and a U.S. governmental contract. Um, in discussions Thursday and Friday, Repass spoke with Bergen about why new about with a guy named Peter Bergen about why new leadership and the improved training of the Ukrainian military has markedly improved its performance in recent years. Now, this is the kind of anti-aircraft. Now, this is the kind of anti-aircraft and anti-tank weapons the Ukrainians hope that the U.S. and its NATO allies will supply them with, and what he sees happening next as the war in Ukraine grinds on. Now, there's now he now Repass predicts a campaign by the Russians that could turn the cities of Ukraine into a rubble, creating a refugee crisis that overwhelms bordering nations and destabilizes Central and the Eastern, and where it destabilizes all of Central and Eastern Europe. Now, Repass believes that while the Russians may be able to overcome Ukrainians' stiff defense, they would not be able to hold on to the country because Putin doesn't have sufficient forces in theater to occupy the large swaths of Ukraine indefinitely. Now, in short, Putin has bitten off more than he can fucking chew. Now, Repass is on the advisory council of the Global Special Operations Foundation, where where Bergen is the chairman of the board. Now, the conversation is at length here. Now, Repass, basically the bottom line is the Ukrainian military forces have acquitted themselves exceptionally well thus far in the war. Now, Russia will have a very difficult time subduing them because they are willing to fight until it becomes seemingly futile, or they will no longer have the resources to do so. The Ukrainians have been overmatched by Russian technology and outmanned and outgunned by Russian tanks, artillery, precision, long-range strike missiles, armored personnel carriers, but the terrain favors the defenders, especially in the north and east of the Ukraine, although less in the south part. I think time and mass are on the Russian side, and they're going to be able to either create conditions for peace suitable to Putin's liking, or they will outright destroy the cities of Ukraine and the Ukrainian military with it, which to me still leaves a resistance scenario for the Ukrainians. So there are multiple plausible futures here. Now, why are the Ukrainians fighting better than many have expected? Basically, we're basically not surprised at how well the Ukrainian army is fighting. What we are surprised about is the lethargy of the Russian assault. It seems to be slow and plodding up the north. In the east, they're getting their asses handed to them. In the south, they seem to be making what they call steady progress. Putin has expected the Ukrainians to capitulate like they did in 2014 when he took Crimea. But overall NATO and the U.S. have done a magnificent job in training the Ukrainian military and reforming it and building it into a viable national defense force since 2014. The difference between then and now is the leadership of Ukraine is set on unifying with the West politically, militarily, and economically. On the military side, President Zelensky has inherited an old cadre of guys that he has replaced. The military leadership he brought in last year are all younger general officers, and they served together in the Donbas region in combat against the Russians. The leadership he has on the military side is much more engaged and much more influential. Zelensky has brought in a new minister of defense. The previous minister was not up to the task for several reasons, so he brought in Alexei Reznikov, and he's been outstanding. So the new leadership has really picked up the pace of reforms that they were given. Now, give or take another year or two later on down the line, those guys would have been in a different place altogether, looking much more like a NATO country's armed forces. Basically, um, I've never visited tactical forces, but like tactical forces places. But Peter Bergen has said he's visited somewhere between 100 to 200 tactical units in various places, going between Afghanistan and Iraq, and he served two combat tours, and he knows instantly um so he knows instantly when they walk into a tactical environment what the dynamic is. And when he visited a Ukrainian Special Forces unit in September, he sensed that immediately that these guys were well trained and that they looked like our guys that they could pass by, and they had the same mannerisms, they had the same planning process. Um, Basically, we had thought that Putin's attack on Ukraine would be like the U.S. military seizing Baghdad in 2003, and that the Russians would decapitate the Ukrainian regime quickly. Basically, we think that's what the world expected. So strategically, that we have the NATO mindset. And hey, we're not going to get involved because the time we commit to this thing, we get cranked up and we get engaged, and the damn thing is going to be fucking over. So we're not going to risk the political capital with another nuclear power to do so. And yet, now we have another geostrategic reality, and whether Ukrainian defense is pretty doggone viable. And we think Ukrainians are in the vanguard of protecting the democratic democracies of Europe. Now, for the Ukrainians, what weapons are needed, and then NATO and the U.S., or is it at the point where it's too late to get weapons in because of logistical issues? Basically, it's not. It really, we look at it, it's like it's not too late. They can get whatever weapons they can get their hands on. But every Ukrainian tactical commander is asking for air defense and anti-tank weapons. They want Air Force weaponry like the Stingers or SA-7s, and they want the anti-tank weapons. And they know where the enemy fucking is. They know how to get to him. They don't have don't have the means in the field. There's congestion in the NATO weapons delivery pipeline because the spigot was turned on days ago, and they haven't reached the Ukrainian tactical units yet. Now we're not speaking for all of NATO in any way, shape, or form when we say this, but one of the things is that they must have a common communication system, which a lot of people don't have. And right now there are dissimilar and cumbersome communications between the Ukrainian commands and the nations that they are providing support for. The second thing is because it isn't a NATO operation, NATO hasn't responded in a formalized way to stand up for the movement coordination centers and logistic control centers. So there's a lot of improvisation going on with the coalition of the willing and able, and putting together the transportation networks and the logistics networks. There's a lot of work that can be done among and between the individual NATO member states to shore up efficiency and effectiveness and speed up the delivery of the lethal weaponry. Now, why is there a 40-mile Russian convoy on the road trying to take Kyiv? And this seems like a strange approach. And yes, it is, because it's at least everybody's scratching their fucking head. There are a couple of things that we need to think this through on. So yes, it's 40 miles. It's a 40-mile long convoy, but the convoy started out in segments, and those segments were somewhere between 50 and a couple hundred vehicles at a time. The idea was for these segments to deploy, but then the congestion started happening due to combat fatalities and breakdowns. Also, if the vehicles and tanks get off the road, that puts them into a quagmire. And there's mud in the region that persists for basically the springtime, running from now for another 6 weeks or so. So cross-country mobility is exceedingly inhibited in the northern part of the country, and the southern part of the country you don't have that problem. So you don't see these massive convoys down south, but you only see it up north, where getting off the road is a fucking problem. Now, this was poorly planned by Russia anyway, and so it's just like that. It was likely not to go well because of the weather circumstances that we're seeing. We're assuming that the Russians are capable of efficient planning, but they're also capable of bad planning. They haven't done this level of planning and execution in any of their training exercises that they try to teach. So they're somewhat unfamiliar with the large maneuver and sustainment aspects of what they're attempting to do. So what's going to be next? A Russian campaign that turns the cities into rubble, creating a refugee crisis, overwhelming the borders and the border nations, and destabilizing Central and Eastern Europe. They're going to target government infrastructure and the means of the command and control, public communications, internet, radio towers, cell phone towers, anything they can do to disrupt communications, so they separate the people from the government. And with this fucking campaign, they want to create mass shock and panic in the society to create complex challenges for the government and to degrade the will of the people. Already about a million refugees have crossed the borders out of a population of around 41 million, and that's going to go up significantly. You're going to have several million people streaming to the west. Now, Belarus and Russia will likely declare the martial law, and they'll be able to clamp down on all manner of public discourse. like the media, internet, and cut down any potential for resistance or coup attempts internal to their countries. Now, they will likely combine forces. They will more than likely try to seal up the western border of Ukraine, first to create a greater humanitarian disaster in Ukraine, and second to cut off any resupply coming in from the west. We think at this point the Ukrainian military will continue to fight primarily west of the Dnieper River. And other places, particularly in the Ukrainian urban centers, you're going to have an insurgency. A resistance will rise up, either pre-planned or organically, and they will inflict pain and destruction on the Russians to the extent that they can. And this is where the term indigestible comes into play. The Russians may be able to consume Ukraine, but they cannot digest it, and it will be too painful to fucking hold on to. And eventually, they will have to spit it back out in essence, and the cost of occupation is too great compared to the returns. The Russians may eventually control the urban areas, but there are vast areas between them, 50 kilometers to 80, anywhere between 50 to 80 kilometers apart, where there's fucking nothing, and there are many small villages and small towns that are not controlled by the Russians. This devastation is going to horrify Europe and North America. The non-intervention argument will eventually be overridden by the human suffering problem, and then potentially a coalition of the willing might impose something along the lines of a no-fly zone or safe havens for refugees and citizens of the major metropolitan areas. So those safe havens could look a little like the kind of safe haven that the U.S. established in Kurdistan in Iraq in 1981. Something like that happened in western Ukraine. Now, what is the minimum that Putin wants to achieve in Ukraine? The one critical thing that Putin must have is control of the North Crimea Canal. And why is that? Because Putin, when he invaded Crimea and Donbas in 2014, the Ukrainians shut off the North Crimea canal source at that one river called the Dnieper. So it dried up, and they've been relying on groundwater in Crimea since. And then the groundwater has all dried up, so Putin has had no fresh water in Crimea until now. The Russians captured the North Crimea Canal, and fresh water just showed up in Crimea in the last day or so. So that's the one thing he had to have. And what he also wanted is to have a land bridge from Donbas over to Crimea, and to secure that land route and the North Crimea Canal source at that river. He would essentially have control of all territory east of the Dnieper River, going up to Kiev, and then arc in the north and east, or in the north and eastward to Donbas. Now, if Putin seizes enough land east of the Dnieper River, then he's willing to bargain everything else away. Now, even with the geographic territory that we just described, Putin's circle of troops is 175,000, which are presently deployed in and around Ukraine, and they're not enough to maintain control of that geography. Now, how much manpower does Putin need to have to control that territory? And it's very difficult to say. The Russians must have enough people to coerce the 41 million people in Ukraine to cooperate with the Russian government, and it took a large part of the German army's eastern front to subdue the Ukrainians so they could pursue their campaign into southern Russia during World War II. So I don't see how Putin's going to be able to pull this off. Basically, we think that the Western democracies have both a moral obligation and a political imperative to support the nation fighting for its independence and the pursuit of a democratic political order in the Western tradition. If not, where will we be able to take a stand against autocratic and revisionist forces? And what should the countries Georgia and Azerbaijan, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, conclude from our timidity in the face of evil? And surely Taiwan is going to be next. I believe Russia's assault on Ukraine is the leading edge of military strong states preying upon the weaker ones, and few of us have thought that we would be here, but so it is. And what are we going to fucking do now? History has been unkind to nations when they tolerate or repeat such aggression. The concepts of territorial integrity and democracy cannot end at NATO's borders. It is the rest of the world. It's up to the rest of the world to be left to the wolves, while there is but one island of security. Russia's attack on Ukraine cannot succeed if we hope to build and sustain the benefits of democracy beyond NATO's borders. So if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. And you can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when the new video comes out. And also, if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find on my About section for YouTube. And if you want to support the work further, so, yep.